Good morning, Julie.
Oh, good morning.
Hmm.
Tell me about this beautiful bowl I see.
Oh, thank you for asking. This is one of my new bowls, and I am falling in love with the tone of this bowl
Mm.
because it is a strong F, which is tuned to the heart chakra. But the longer I play it, it has these sweet undertones of C and G, which is our root and our throat.
I love that.
And I felt like this bowl really wanted to play with us today because we're going to be talking about our strong roots, but then our undertones that want to come to the surface and be known as well.
Mm.
So I've been talking in some groups that I'm in about how this time of stillness is shining light in all the corners. And sadly, in a lot of the groups, the light that gets shined in the corner is, there are things that want to be known, but they tend to be kind of painful things that we keep in the corners.
Mm.
So I've just been thinking about this being in stillness and the light shining and what wants to come up and what wants to be known and wants to be known about ourselves. So I was thinking of back when we got started with our poetry and sound back in March and our experiment of being in stillness and being together but separate. And this was a lovely way for you and I to connect a little bit deeper during this time. And in thinking about these groups, where we've been talking about the stillness and slowing down is shining this light. So I thought I'd go to the soul and ask the soul for a poem and ask about a poem and being guided to a poem that helps me understand this solitude and these lights being shine. And is there anything positive about shining the light and letting some of these things come to the surface? So this was my intention,
I love it.
to a poem that helps bring some positivity to all of this light shining in the corners. So as soon as I asked this of my soul, I got an immediate hit. And I'm really practicing not ignoring the immediate hits,
Mm.
um, but really paying attention. So I asked for this soul guidance, and the immediate hit that I got was pull out your John Donahue book, Anam Cara. And I couldn't ignore it because I hadn't read the book in a while. So it's not
Mhm.
like it was on my mind. So I grabbed the book. And in using this soul wisdom, I decided I'll just open the book, and wherever that lands is the message for today. So, for those who are not familiar with the book, it is not a book of poetry. It is a book of wisdom, and there are poems scattered throughout the book. So when I opened the book, it immediately opened to a page with a poem on it. So, and I couldn't ignore that either. Before I asked for this guidance, I'm drawn
Mhm.
to this book that's not a book full of poetry, but it opens to a poem. And the poem is called A Blessing of Solitude. I'm not kidding. I can't make this up.
Yeah. You asked the question, you were pondering the deep thought, and you got the oracle of Celtic wisdom.
And there it is. So
Yeah.
part of the stillness for me is the slowing down of really that deep listening to the inner
Mhm.
wisdom and not ignoring. all the
Right.
messages. So here, a blessing of solitude. And I also started thinking about John O'Donohue. And I have to say, unfortunately, I was late to the party because John O'Donohue in his Celtic wisdom did not find me until after his unexpected death in 2008. Um, and his wisdom found me through his good friend, the poet David White.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been thinking about him, and I allowed the rabbit hole of discovery to take me down the path. And so, doing some reading and listening to some interviews. And I was really drawn to this idea of letting the light shine in all the corners and allowing your true self to continue to come out and evolve and shine throughout your life. And I've been drawn to this idea that we're not just one thing. We continue to evolve in our lifetime. And so this was, I think, another bit of the wisdom that soul drew me to John Donahue this week. In reading a little bit more about this poet and this theologian and this philosopher, that who insisted beauty as a human calling. And he had a lifelong fascination with the inner landscape of our lives and with what he called the invisible world that is constantly intertwining what we can know and see.
Mm.
So, just a smidge about him. He was born in 1956 into a native Gaelic speaking family. They lived on a farm that had been in his family for generations in County Clare, Ireland. He was the oldest of four children. He learned to work alongside his parents and his family, developing his kinship with the wild landscape. He also went off to university after going to his local primary school, and he alternated working on the farm, balance of working on the farm and pursuing his education. He let's see, what he says about his childhood on the farm is that it was a huge wild invitation to extend your imagination, an ancient conversation between the land and the sea.
Mm.
So you see these seeds beginning to plant within him. So then things get interesting because he entered the seminary at a young age and became a Catholic priest for 19 years.
Mm-hmm.
So here is how begins his life as one thing, as a priest. And then in the 80s, he continues his studies and goes to Germany and is deeply entrenched in studying philosophy. So here he has these worlds merging, um, where he is one thing, which is a priest, but his intellectual curiosity continues to shed light in all the dark spaces. I think not just
Mm-hmm.
of himself, but of humanity. And so
Mm-hmm.
he eventually leaves the priesthood and devotes himself full time to meditating and writing on beauty, friendship, and how the visible and the invisible, the material and the spiritual, intertwine in the human experience. And so, I've just been thinking about how when we slow down and really deeply listen, we hear our inner landscape calling us, and that he gave himself permission to continue to evolve, and continue to think about how can I serve myself, my community, my country, humanity. And so he was willing to evolve and step from one to the other. And for me, that feels a lot like being able to be still and to deeply listen to all the dark places within.
Wow. That's beautiful.
So, this blessing of solitude, I think, is really lovely and permission um, to be with your soul and be with yourself. So, A Blessing for Solitude by John O'Donohue. May you recognize in your life the presence, power, and light of your soul. May you realize that you are never alone, that your soul, in its brightness and belonging, connects you intimately with the rhythm of the universe. May you have respect for your own individuality and difference. May you realize that the shape of your soul is unique, that you have a special destiny here, that behind the facade of your life, there is something beautiful, good, and eternal happening. May you learn to see yourself with the same light, delight, pride, and expectation with which God sees you in every moment. May you realize that the shape of your soul is unique, that you have a special destiny here, that behind the facade of your life, there is something beautiful, good, and eternal happening.
Mm. Yeah. He had such a way with stringing words together to kind of evoke that feeling of sacred, that we are all these sacred vessels, that if you're here on this planet, you've already won the lottery.
Mm.
And if you've won that lottery, you have work to do. You don't need your passage has been paid. Like,
Yes.
get about your contribution. And your contribution can be as simple as enjoying the beauty of life that is around you.
Yes.
And I love, you know, I'm sure there was some pain in his decision to leave the priesthood, but I think it's interesting we're talking about shining your light in the darker places. I think his light was shining brightly in an institution where there was a lot of darkness in the corners and a lot of things being buried and not disclosed fully. And this feeling of the church as an institution. Um, and he was a spiritual being first and foremost. And, that it must have been very challenging for him to becoming so well known in many ways, and people wanted to hear what he had to say,
Right.
and it was breaking from tradition.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can't imagine. We had him for such a short time. Didn't he pass away like at 52 or 3? Like, he was
Mm-hmm.
fairly young.
Young.
Yeah.
Young. And, I was thinking about imagining hearing these words every day of your life.
Hmm.
And I think if I heard these words every day of my life, I would be a shining light in all of the
Yeah.
dark places. And
Yeah.
so I've been saying some of these words to myself every day since I came across this poem. And especially, may you realize that the shape of your soul is unique, that you have a special destiny here, and that behind the facade of your life, there is something beautiful, good, and eternal happening.
Hmm.
What if that was your guiding light as you move through the world? And that beautiful, good, eternal happening is as simple as turning towards the sun and enjoying the beauty in every day.
Hmm.
So I kind of
Yeah.
have a two for us today
I love it.
because, this whole idea of solitude. And so John O'Donohue left us with a little bit more about the wisdom of solitude.
Mm,
So he has a piece called Solitude. Solitude is one of the most precious things in the human spirit. It is different from loneliness. When you are lonely, you become acutely conscious of your own separation. Solitude can be a homecoming to our own deepest belonging. In each person, there is a point of absolute non connection when everything else and with everyone. This is fascinating and frightening. It means that we cannot continue to seek outside ourselves for things we need from within. The blessings for which we hunger are not to be found in other places or people. These gifts can only be given to you by yourself. They are at home at the hearth of your soul.
mhm.
Mm,
Boy, does that not sort of speak to what every human being on this planet is facing on some level as a result of COVID-19 and changes that are thrust upon us all,
mhm.
and how to recognize the difference between solitude and loneliness.
Right.
And when you're lonely, for some people, there's not much you can do about that. You can try to, you know, I guess it's only as lucky as your kind of system of who you're living with or not. Because
Mhm.
you can be living with people and still be lonely.
And
That's
still be
another really
lonely.
interesting situation.
Right. And you can be living alone and not be lonely.
Exactly.
Um, Fortunately, with technology, we can stay connected, which is how you and I
Hmm.
started Poetry and Sound, was
Hmm.
deepening a connection during a time of being separated.
Right.
And then solitude and being able to know the difference between loneliness and solitude. And I love solitude. I could stay alone
Hmm.
for long periods of time and
Hmm.
really cultivate this deep listening and allow that listening to guide. So it's interesting with COVID because we're forced into solitude, um, which is also a gift that we may not have been able to give ourselves if we weren't forced into it.
Hmm.
Yeah. I,
Yeah, I think it's interesting the term social distancing and how some people have such an aversion to that word, and they continue to reframe it and say, no, it's physical distancing. Like, as that reminder, we need to be physically distanced, but not socially distanced.
hmm.
Yeah.
It
And,
also,
words.
I was listening to a podcast this morning um, where someone was talking about this forced distancing gave her permission to stay in solitude, and
Hmm.
that she didn't have to feel bad about declining an invitation for coffee or lunch because she wanted to stay in solitude to continue her work. So it kind of took this away from her and it gave her permission to remain in solitude for as long as she wanted to. And it just got me thinking about sometimes we deny ourselves necessary solitude because of other obligations or expectations.
Hmm.
So I'm really trying to stay mindful of this during this time with the intention of bringing the solitude forward as we will shift gears eventually into being social again. But how can I stay in solitude and give myself permission? Just because other people are socializing together doesn't mean I have to every time I'm offered an invitation.
Hmm. I think that's part of what probably attracted us to meditation.
Mm-hmm.
It's permission to be still and know.
Yeah.
And John O'Donohue talks about that. Be still and know. That's the only way to connect with that interior life, that
Right.
interior voice. For some people, it's a feeling. For some people, they hear it. For some people, they have a visual. Our senses are varied because we're so varied. But that's what I definitely love about my meditation practice is it gives me that opportunity to dip into
Yes.
that
Yes.
that landscape, that interior landscape. And that's something that I'm sure John O'Donohue as a young man, especially, have you been to the west coast of Ireland? Have you seen that landscape? Um, being able to be out on the land,
Right.
caring for animals, caring for the land, rugged conditions, in extreme weather, all of that was probably just like, the makings of a great imagination in a child.
Yes. And something about having to really listen when you're out on the land, listening to your internal
Mm-hmm.
wisdom about how to proceed, what to do next.
Mm-hmm.
So I like these seeds that were planted early in his life and the permission to follow his internal wisdom, that
Mm-hmm.
it started out as one thing, and as he continued to listen, it evolved into another thing. I was going to say
Mm-hmm.
different, but not too different. Um, but the way that it looked and that permission to continue to listen and evolve,
Mm-hmm.
I think is lovely. And I want to cultivate that permission within myself. And by doing that, hopefully, spreading that energy around me as well, that people have permission, that those around me have permission to listen and pursue um, the light that shines within them.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It makes me think. We buried a very important man for American history this week,
Mm.
John Lewis, and thinking about his life. Um, he was a man who had that same quality of listening to his deeper wisdom,
Yes.
of cultivating his ability to follow something away from the pack, to he was just this gentle giant of a man. And I think that there are these people that are sort of put on our path as way showers,
Yeah.
as wisdom keepers, to demonstrate that it's within all of us to have this ability to go in and do the work inside and cultivate courage, because courage is not about not being afraid, um, but being afraid and doing what's right anyway,
Right.
all of that. And listening to yourself and following that wisdom can be a fearful thing for humanity.
Hmm. It wasn't, when we talk about John Lewis, this was not an easy path for
Mm-mm.
him. But the way that he showed up every day with his internal wisdom
Mm-hmm.
and giving permission for everybody else to show up, and that your wisdom didn't necessarily have to agree with him, but it was show up in that, in your own wise way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for John O'Donohue to leave the priesthood after so many years as a young man raised in this tradition, but to know, no, I have a deeper wisdom to follow. I have a deeper guidance. That's That's the mark of a beautifully lived life.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so the poet David White introduced me to John O'Donohue, and David White has a poem called A Promise to Be Broken. And I've worked with this poem, and it is about the courage to recognize when one way of being is no longer working for you. And do
Mm.
you continue because you made that promise, but it's no
Hmm.
longer serving you or serving others? Or do you have the courage to break that promise and continue to follow your internal wisdom? And, that just opened so many doors for me. This idea that we evolve. And so what made sense today doesn't necessarily make sense next year, and it's not serving
Hmm.
you or the people around you. So if we think about continuing to be in service to ourselves and to others, we continue to evolve and adapt as we're listening to that internal wise voice that we all possess. Hmm. Well, Julie,
Yeah.
oh my goodness.
Boy, that's,
Thank
yeah,
you.
John O'Donohue. What a beautiful way to start this day. And that is one of my favorite books. You know, and it's a book of prose, it's a book of wisdom, and tucked in are these beautiful poems inserted every now and then. But
Yes.
just the way he talks about friendship and love. And Anamkara means soul friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, my best friend is Irish, and her parents came over on the Queen Mary and moved to Santa Monica. She was born in Santa Monica, so she's first generation American. Um, and we've visited Ireland together and toured around Galway and that area as well. And I have called her my Anam Cara for
Mm.
years and years. And it's such a beautiful word. And I remember something that in that book that John O'Donohue said, which was about how real friendship or love is not something that is ever manufactured. It can't be, you can't achieve it through will. It is intentional, and it's more an act of recognition. And so it's when you are meeting people who you have that attraction to or whatever, it's soul to soul recognition.
Yes.
And it's that, oh, there you are
Yes.
experience. And
Yes.
so that was my introduction to John O'Donohue, which made me go need to buy that book and like, yeah, because that was that experience of meeting my best friend in high school, freshman year, Sister Jean Morning Stars art class, St. Monica's High School. And we both were sitting at the same butcher block art table facing each other. And it was that like instant, like, discovery of another human being that was that sort of first time best friend experience, you know.
That experience where you meet somebody and you know that physically you've never met, but
Hmm.
your souls already know each other.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think it's not a coincidence this week that I have been, pondering through this book and John O'Donohue and really sitting with this poem that I haven't been alone in the sitting this week, that my uh, Irish women ancestors have been hanging around this week.
Mm.
My maternal grandmother and her sisters and their friends who were lifelong friends. There was my grandmother and her sisters, but they had friends that were so close that we called them our aunts as well. And I've just really been thinking and remembering, and they have been reminding me of the light. And one of their lights was their senses of humor. And
Mm,
I had forgotten about their humor, and it has shown up for me of remembering how to use humor in your everyday life so that when
mhm.
there's the light in the darkness of the corners, how do you access humor so that it's not weighing you down so heavily?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't have mud on your wings.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Uh,
Well, Julie, what a lovely start to a weekend. Thank you for sharing Saturday morning with me.
oh, I enjoyed it. And yeah, I'm so glad that John O'Donohue kind of found his way in today. It's nice. He has much wisdom to reflect on.
Yes.
And yeah, I enjoyed that very much.
Yeah.
Mm.
All right. Well, have just a lovely weekend.
All right. You too, my friend.
Okay. I look forward
All
to
right.
the poem that finds you next week.
Me too.
All right.
Okay. Bye.